Hey everyone, I'm Almar of almarsguides.com, and in this video here I'm going to be talking about the champion class in Titan Quest. So this is a combination of warfare and nature, and you're essentially going to be like a caster, I guess, is the best way to describe myself. You basically don't attack and you let your pets do everything, and we'll explain how all of this works in a little bit. It's a very, very fun and very, very powerful class. A bit glass cannony since you have to focus on unique types of gear, but we'll get into that. First, let's start at the warfare tree. So eventually I'm going to probably put 1 point into all of these passives, but the main thing that you need in the warfare tree is battle standard. That is like your bread and butter ability. Dodge attacks is extremely helpful as well, and war horn combined with ancestral horn. So really all you need in this whole tree is battle standard, dodge attacks, Warhorn, and Ancestral Horn. And you want the passives that are connected to the battle standard, you want the passives that are connected to the Warhorn, and you want the passives that are connected to the Ancestral Horn. These are going to be our 3 warfare bread and butter abilities. Early in the game, you'll probably use Onslaught a little bit before you get ramped up to like legendary difficulty. I used Onslaught maybe until about until legendary, whatever level I got to legendary in. I honestly cannot remember. So in nature, what we're going to be using is Heart of the Oak. Only 1 point goes into Tranquility of Water, and then max out Permanence of Stone. Briar Ward, I'm just experimenting with. You don't have to worry about that. Refresh, you definitely want. You probably want max points into this, depending on what your gear looks like. Call of the Wild, you'd want max points into this too, depending on what your gear looks like. 1 point goes into Maul, max out Survival Instinct, and max out Strength of the Pact. Sylvan Nymph, this is like a good tree to dump your points into when you don't have anything else to spend them in. I'd put 1 point into the passives and let your plus skills take it from there, but max out the Sylvan Nymph. And then Plague. So essentially how we play the build is going to be this. Our pets do most of our damage, and what we want mostly, let me go over my gear real fast too, is we want gear with recharge on it. So I'll show you in a second. Here's my mace. I picked this because it has elemental resistances on it. If I could find something with +1 to skills, I would prefer that though. This is something that I took specifically because it has resists on it. The helm I took because it has +1 to all skills, plus it has some resists on it, which are nice. Ring resists is primarily what I took it for. It's got some regeneration, which is nice too. The shield I took because it has +1 to all skills, plus it has resists on it, which are nice. The chest, this one I specifically took because it has minus recharge on it, and it has some nice resists on it as well. This piece of gear, I'm essentially basically only using it for the recharge that it has on it. Minus 45% recharge, which is huge. Necklace of Harmonia. This is another piece that I'm using pretty much just because of the resists. This I'm using mostly because of the resist, and it gives a little bonus to my pets. And then this is the best in slot charm that you can possibly get for this build, and the reason for that is because it has minus recharge on it and it has resists on it. So our build is essentially going to be built around this minus recharge stat. And the reason for that is look at how effective it is essentially. Well, actually let me show you more in combat. So we drop the battle standard, and then we hit recharge once, and you can see the battle standard is back up, and also Warhorn comes back up too, so we can use Warhorn again. So the minus recharge essentially allows us to use the battle standard every single pack of enemies, which is one of the more important things, and it also allows us to drop more than 1 battle standard if we're fighting a lot of enemies at once. So as you can see, there's my 1 battle standard just depopped, but let me show you. So we have 2 battle standards down right there. They're kind of overlapping. You do not get credit if they overlap. So there's 3 battle standards. There's 4 battle standards. As you can see, so long as we can keep hitting recharge, we can literally just keep dropping battle standards everywhere. We're up to 6 now. So basically you can drop as many as you want until they start depopping. And that is one of the more important things of this skill. Being able to constantly drop your battle standards and constantly reuse your skills that are on cooldown. And I'm going to show you the next skill that makes this build insanely overpowered, which is Ancestral Warhorn. So that's these little ghost guys that you see I got with me. And these guys do a shit ton of damage. The only downside is they only last like 30 seconds, but since we have so much plus recharge, or minus recharge, more accurately, that's not really that big of a deal. We can just constantly resummon these guys as much as we want. So the basis of this build, the most important ability you can get is plus skills, or the most important stats you can get is plus skills and minus recharge. I would argue plus skills is more important than minus recharge, and I'd also argue that you don't have to max out recharge, although most guides you read on this build will say that. I would say a minor amount, like maybe 30 to 40% recharge is the sweet spot. Anything after that, and you kind of are overdoing it a bit. Like, what I mean by that is I probably don't even have to buy, or I probably don't even have to use the refresh nature skill to constantly refresh my cooldowns, which as you can see I'm doing. Like, I will usually refresh as I get to each new pack of enemies. That way my battle standard's up, my Warhorn's up, and my Ancestral Horn is up. The Ancestral Horn, we only have to really hit refresh twice in order to get that skill back off of cooldown. So I'll show you in a second. It just faded. So one refresh, it almost cooled it down by half. Another refresh, it's almost there. And then we have one more refresh, which we're going to hit now. And now the skill's back up. So as you can see, and the spirits will stay around for another, let's say, 20 seconds after I finish refreshing the skill. So there's a 20-second window where I don't need to use refresh. I don't need to really do anything to resummon my ancestral guys. So it's up to you if you want to stack refresh that high at the cost of everything else. Because right now I would really like to replace these with Stonebinder's Cuffs, because it would give me a little bit more defense. The dexterity that I get in my gear would give me a little bit more defense, if nothing else. And also it would give me the +3 skills so I could make up for some other skills in other places. So as you can see, my character has kind of weird stats right now. I got like 540 strength, 470 intellect, and 320 dexterity. It's kind of like a weird mishmash of all of my shit. And that's because I needed strength to wear the strength gear, but I also need the intellect to wear the Archmage's clasp and the intellect gear that gives me minus to recharge. So that's why I'm kind of like a mishmash of two things. And I personally would actually recommend you don't do that. I would actually personally recommend you do primarily strength gear, and don't bother dumping too much into intelligence at all. Dump the rest into dexterity and then do like Stonebinder's Cuffs or something like that. If I had to do it all again, that's what I would do for sure, 100%, no questions asked, because I don't feel as if recharge benefits this build as much as all the guides claim that it does. I don't believe that you need max recharge in order to get the most out of this build. I believe that refresh essentially gets you the most out of this build. So long as you have the refresh nature ability, you can basically make sure your cooldowns are up for every single fight, because you can use refresh usually once at the start of the fight, and then in between. Almost got my ass killed there by too many pangs. So you can use refresh at the start of basically every fight, and at while you're running between the packs of mobs. And with that in mind, I don't think you need to stack that high of refresh, because you don't. I've never been in a situation where I'm still waiting for my skills to. I don't think I have that one yet. Where I'm still waiting for my skills to come up. And let me show you. I'll take off this real fast. I'll take off my biggest piece of recharge gear, the Archmage clasp, and I will show you the difference. So that's minus 45% recharge. And as you can see, my shit is definitely cooling down a lot slower. But, ow. But it's still not really a problem. Like, I still, I have problem with survivability for these mobs because they're probably hitting me with vitality damage, which, as you can see, I have very, very poor resist in. But other than that, I'm not having trouble with recharge. There's not a moment where I'm fighting these mobs and I'm like, oh my god, you know, I need my skills to come off of cooldown. So battle standard, And then I can hit recharge, and as you can see, the battle standard is basically almost up again.
Thank you for your aid.
So as you can see, though, we do, without the max recharge, we do lose a little bit of uptime on our ancestral guys. With the Archmage's clasp that we have, we can get full uptime on our ancestral horn, which is one of the main abilities of this build. So this is essentially the difference as far as recharge goes. It's whether or not you went full uptime on your ancestral horn, the little ghost guys, or not. Other than that, I would say you can still, even with a minor amount of recharge, you can still drop battle standard with each pack of enemies. And you can use ancestral horn for the majority of your packs. Like, as you can see, I'm still waiting for it to come up now, and it dropped. So it's finally back up. So I would say by removing the Archmage's clasp, we get about 20 seconds of downtime on our ancestral horn, which isn't too shabby. It depends on what you like to do when you play and how you play the game. If you don't feel like if you're somebody like me, this build actually doesn't really work the best for players like me, because I have a tendency to not use all of my abilities. Like, I have a tendency to half-ass unless it requires me to full-ass. So unless I'm like fighting a really difficult boss, I will usually just run from like pack to back. Like, I'll be watching, you know, some movie or watching anime or something like that, and I will just like run into a pack of mobs like this, drop what I need to, and then basically just let my pets kill it. And if you're that sort of player, then full uptime on Ancestral Horn probably isn't something that will completely appeal to you, just like it doesn't completely appeal to me. And but that is essentially the bread and butter of this build. The main reason this build is so powerful is because we are stacking recharge, we have the refresh nature ability, and we can essentially keep full uptime on our Uber pets, the Ancestral Horn. And this is a both good farming character as well as boss killer. You won't have much trouble with many bosses. And one thing you should keep in mind too is the enemies here are all drastically higher level than me. I'm level 70, they're like upper 70s. So that's one of the reasons I'm taking a whole bunch of damage from them. I also don't have as much physical resist as I would like, or as much vitality resist as I would like either, because I had to stack bonus recharge on my gear. Probably the best piece of gear you could get for this entire build would be Stonebinder's cuffs with minus recharge on them. I would argue that is probably, like, I don't think you would find anything better than that for this build. The Archmage's clasp that I have is a very, very good secondary replacement for minus recharge if you can get it. And this Talisman of the Jade Emperor is basically our best in-slot divine artifact. So it is a build that definitely requires more gear than most other builds. It would be preferable if you had some inheritance gear, aka gear to pass down, or gear that you're passing down from other characters. But that's mostly up to you. You definitely can play this build without any of that inheritance gear. As far as weaknesses go, I would say this build's biggest weakness is the survivability it has, and also the reliance on the Ancestral Horn AI, which I have issues with. Like, let me show you here. One thing I don't like about the Ancestral Horns is once they get tagged on the mobs, they have a tendency to not leave those mobs alone. Like, let me try to run away from those mobs there. No, they keep leashing, which is actually good. It's what I want them to do, but I'm not able to show you the example. Like, as you can see, they keep porting to me and then running towards mobs that are off screen that they're fighting, that they're tied onto. They have a tendency to do this a lot if you're skipping mobs. And that is the biggest downside to using them, is they seem to get like hung up on a mob that they're attacking that's off screen, but they can't reach the mob because every single time they run off screen, they just teleport back to you. So they get stuck in that like chain of trying to run off screen but constantly being teleported back to you. And to resolve that, you have two options. You can, one, resummon them, or two, kill the mobs that they're actually running towards. Or technically, third option, just go slower as you're clearing through all of the mobs and either kill every pack or only summon them when you get to the location where you want to go. And it's one other change that I may have made to this build, or may make to this build if I play it for a lot longer, is Plague. I'm not entirely sure if this is my own personal preference, because how I like to play certain builds is different than how most people do, but I have a tendency to forget to use Plague a lot when I'm playing. And that's also one of the reasons I don't have it maxed out. I feel as if I have too much going on that I have to hit anyway per battle. Like, I have to drop the banner, I have to hit the Warhorn multiple times, I have to use Refresh, I have to use the Ancestral Horn. There's so many abilities that I can hit basically during the battle that I always forget to use Plague. So I don't know how useful Plague would be in this build if you're always forgetting to hit it. But if you're somebody who never forgets to hit it, then, you know, more power to you, and you'll probably get a lot of use out of it. Plague with the Warhorn debuffs, because Plague reduces physical damage done, and I'm pretty sure physical damage taken, as well as resists, and so does Warhorn. After you use Warhorn, it reduces the armor of all enemies that were affected by it. So Plague and Warhorn together they put a very, very powerful debuff on the opponents. And that allows your Ancestral Horn and your wolves and all of your pets to basically just run right through the enemies.
We are working hard to take back Chang'an.
I hate this door. It's always a pain in the ass to open. There we go.
Hail, champion.
So let's run up here and I will show you this boss with the build. This is actually one of the harder bosses too. He does an insane amount of physical damage. Well, these terracotta soldiers do an insane amount of physical damage. The boss is a caster, but it's a good example of, as you can see, I do take a lot of spike damage from these terracotta guys, so this is a good example of my weakness. You can see the build at its essentially weakest. And I have 0 deaths so far, but I have a feeling I'm going to get a death in this video. No, get away from me, terracottas. So if you're watching, as you can see, I use refresh quite often, usually in between battles. I always try to remember to hit it. And my pets destroyed that boss before he even had a chance to get to the throne. Usually between every battle, I'll hit refresh, and I also hit it during the battle sometimes because it helps out with a double Warhorn if I would like to. I'm pretty sure I already have the Battle Mage circuit, so I don't need it.
Warrior and warrior.
2 attribute points to spend now. I'm going to invest them into dexterity because I want more defensive ability, as well as I would like to replace the Archmage cuffs that I have with Stonebinders. So that's my choice for dex. However, strength wouldn't be a bad choice either because if I unequip some of this gear and lose enough strength, I won't be able to use like that mace right there. Or thankfully, it seems as though when I unequip my gear, I can still keep that mace equipped. That's the only thing that I have to worry about, though. And that's also kind of one of the biggest downsides of this build. Oh no, they're hurting me. Technically, with this build, you can use Onslaught if you wanted to instead of Warhorn on the left click. As you can see, I have Warhorn on my left click. However, I use 2 most of the time when I hit Warhorn. And the only reason I don't still use Onslaught is because I already have too many buttons to hit. There's already too much going on in every single fight for me to use Onslaught as well. I just don't have the time. Like I said before, I don't even have the time to use Plague most of the time. Or I forget to use Plague, despite the fact that I'm used to using that ability from playing my Ritualist all the time. There's just so much that goes on with this build that it's hard to find time to hit every single ability that you have. Although Plague still is very, very useful for bosses. Aha, his War Banner's there too. So that's why I was getting destroyed. If you're going to make a champion yourself, I would highly recommend that, ooh, cool, another Sabertooth. I would highly recommend that you focus more on survivability than I did. That is by far my biggest complaint about this build, is the very low survivability of it. As you can see, I have a shit ton of health because I have Heart of the Oak and I have some points into nature, but that still isn't enough to offset the amount of damage that I take. And I think the reason I take a lot of damage is, 1, because I don't have a lot of physical resist or pierce resist. I also don't have a lot of vitality resist. And I don't have very high defensive ability because my dexterity is shit. Like, my defensive ability is really, really, really low. And that's just because I couldn't get specialized enough gear to what I needed for this build. This build is one of the builds that you need very, very, very specialized gear that's built like just for them, because you're looking for the minus recharge on your gear. So if you can't find, or rather, so you have to use shitty pieces of gear that have, you know, plus recharge on them or minus recharge on them in order to complement the build. It means you can't always focus on other things like survivability. Thankfully, though, my resists are max, so at least there's that. That's saved me from dying multiple times, but as you've still seen from throughout the course of this video, sometimes they take insane spike damage, and that's no good. That's something that'll get you killed, and usually in Titan Quest, that is what gets you killed, spike damage. I want to show you the Dragon Lich, and then I figure we can end the video after that. For now, you're just getting some up close and personal gameplay. Forgot to drop my battle standard. See, like I said earlier, the one thing I don't like about this build is you have to be very Johnny on the spot when you play. You can't zone out and forget to like do something. If you zone out and forget to drop your battle standard, you lose a shit ton of damage. Or if you forget to make your ancestral horns again, you lose a shit ton of damage. It's a very, very active build. It's not one of those builds that you can just zone out and watch TV at the same time as you're playing, because you'll just turn back and you'll be dead. Or you'll turn back and wonder why the hell nothing is dying because you're not doing enough damage. Ouchies. If I can mouse it, there we go. See how his health is going down so fast? For my pets wailing on him. That is the beauty of this build. Is your pets are just insanely powerful when you get the right position. Or when you get all the right buffs on them and stuff like that. Don't think I have those bracers either. But that's all there is to the champion build in Titan Quest. This build will definitely take you to, end of Act 5. It's definitely a very, very good end game build. You just need to focus a little bit more on defensive ability than I have. But that's all there is to it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something, and I will see you guys around the next video. Peace.